Washington, D.C., November 15, 2022. My name is Alan Walker, and until a few months ago, I believed I was just another journalist covering national politics, a small cog in the vast machinery of the media. I uncovered scandals, asked uncomfortable questions, and on rare occasions, landed headlines that made a real impact. However, the last story I covered brought neither glory nor recognition. It brought no awards, not even a promotion. Instead, it dragged me into a nightmare, a darkness from which I cannot escape. As I write these words, I know they'll come for me at any moment. I am doomed. I don't know how much longer I can hold out because, unintentionally, I uncovered secrets far beyond the surface, far beyond what any human should know. Secrets buried beneath the heart of world power, the White House. It all began in an oddly mundane way, like many of the stories I've covered. It was late at night, and I was hungover. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket as I struggled to stay awake in the back of the taxi taking me home. It was 3 a.m. when I saw the notification for an anonymous message on my screen. Initially, I didn't pay much attention. These messages always popped up, conspiracy theories claiming the government controlled aliens or that an ancient cult ruled the world from the shadows. Fantasies, no doubt. But something about this message, maybe its urgent tone or the fact that I was too tired to think straight, made me read it. It said, "They control nothing. The real power is in the shadows, in the White House, in the foundations. If you want to know more, go further, much further." The message stuck in my mind, a persistent shadow. The next day, I woke up with a throbbing headache. There was something about that message that bothered me. It was different from the other crazy theories I was used to receiving. It seemed more real. Sure, it could have been my exhaustion, or maybe my journalistic curiosity that never let me ignore a lead, but the truth is, I started investigating. At first, just for fun, with no great expectations. I convinced myself it was just another interesting lie to explore. However, the more layers I peeled back, the clearer it became that what I had discovered was far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The White House is the epicenter of world power. Every day, powerful figures walk in and out of those doors. Presidents, senators, ambassadors, all seeking to shape the destiny of nations. But there was something there, something deep and dark, that no one had ever connected to anything concrete. I started digging through old files, delving into mysterious events related to the White House. What I found was disturbing. From the beginning, something seemed to subtly change in the behavior of presidents shortly after their inauguration. They became more reserved, distrustful, and certain figures around them would disappear or fall mysteriously ill. All of this had never been directly correlated, but I began to see a pattern. I decided to follow this trail. With each new discovery, my discomfort grew. Soon, I found someone who could offer me more answers. Thomas Finch, a former Secret Service agent who had worked in the White House during several administrations, agreed to meet me at a remote cafe. He was a man marked by experience, his graying hair and deep circles under his eyes, indicating sleepless nights and a life full of tension. When I met him, I noticed he was nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to be watching. "I can't say much," he said, his voice hoarse. "But there's something in the White House, something all presidents know about but never mention. A presence." I tried to mask my skepticism. Finch continued, his eyes fixed on the table. "I don't know what it is, and I hope I never find out. But I felt it many times. It's not cameras or guards watching you. It's something deeper, something ancient. Everyone who stays there long enough senses it. And it's never spoken of." I leaned in a bit, intrigued. "What do you mean by something ancient?" I asked, trying to understand what he was really hinting at. He hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he held his coffee cup. "The walls of the White House have too much history, things that have never been told. I can't continue." He dropped some bills on the table and abruptly stood up. "Don't look for me again, or you'll be next. No one who knows the truth lives with it for long." And with that, he was gone. I sat there for a few minutes, digesting his words. A good journalist should know when a lead is false or when something more is at play. And my gut told me there was something very serious going on. I knew I shouldn't continue, but I couldn't stop. Something about this story was calling to me, a growing obsession. The investigation, which had once been a mere curiosity, became an unrelenting search for answers. After that conversation with Finch, things started to take a more concrete shape. My investigations led me to an even more disturbing discovery. There was an underground area beneath the White House, a part that few knew about, and even fewer had accessed. I discovered this after meeting Gerald, a janitor who had worked there for over 30 years. He had little to lose, and for a reasonable price he told me about the White House's depths, places that didn't appear on modern blueprints. We met at a bar along a highway outside Washington, far from anywhere we could be recognized. Gerald drank slowly, and with each sip, he seemed to grow more nervous. "The old room," he said softly, almost reverently. "It's been there since before the White House was built, or at least that's what they say. Most presidents don't even know it exists, but I've seen it, and I can show you, if you're willing." I knew I was about to cross a line I shouldn't, but I didn't hesitate. Some greater force was pushing me, an urgent need to uncover what was behind this story. The next night, we sneaked into the White House, disguised, after most of the staff had gone home. We used an old security card Gerald had kept, something forgotten by everyone but still functional. We slipped past the cameras, which were conveniently down for maintenance that night, and headed to a maintenance door at the back of the building. We descended a steep, creaky staircase, the air around us growing heavier with each step. I could feel the tension building inside me, fear mixed with excitement. I was about to discover something that few people had ever seen. At the bottom of the stairs, the only light came from Gerald's trembling flashlight. He pointed it at an ancient stone wall covered in moss. Strange symbols were carved there, symbols I had never seen before. They were complex geometric shapes, intertwined with distorted faces that seemed to move in the darkness, but when I looked directly, they remained still. "This has been here longer than anyone knows," Gerald whispered. "No one knows where it came from or who put it here. We only know it's here, and it's always been." That wall pulsed with an indescribable energy. There was something wrong, something in the air that felt alive. I stood staring at the symbols, hypnotized by their shapes and the faint whisper that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Suddenly, we heard a distant metallic sound, like something moving in the depths around us. Gerald went pale, turned off the flashlight, and quickly started climbing the stairs. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't have gone there. Something in that room, in that ancient chamber, had affected me in ways I still couldn't fully understand. In the days that followed, Gerald disappeared. None of his colleagues knew what had happened. His house was empty, and he left no trace. I tried to return to the White House, but this time, security was much tighter. It was as if they knew I had discovered something, that I had been somewhere forbidden. The more I tried to continue the investigation, the more paranoid I became. I started seeing shadows where I shouldn't, figures passing by corners, whispers in my apartment. At first, I thought the stress was getting to me, but as the days went by, it became clear that it wasn't just my imagination. Something had been awakened in that chamber, and now it was following me. That same week, I decided to visit Dr. Samuel Hawthorne, a retired historian who specialized in American folklore and urban legends. He was one of the few academics willing to talk about the things I had seen. We met at his house, an old, dimly lit residence in Georgetown. The place was crammed with books and old documents, many of which seemed to belong to distant eras. "Alan, I know what you saw," he said, his voice laden with concern. "Those symbols, they're part of something ancient, something that shouldn't be disturbed." He showed me a book with pages yellowed by time, filled with symbols and grotesque illustrations, many of which resembled the ones I had seen on that wall. "This is part of an ancient cult," Hawthorne continued. "Something that predates the United States by far. There are legends from Native American tribes that spoke of a dark force buried here long before the Europeans arrived. They called it the Beast, an entity that feeds on ambition, chaos, and power. And the White House, Alan, was built right on top of this force." His words triggered a sense of terror I couldn't control. He explained that something was buried beneath the White House, something ancient and malevolent, an entity that had influenced presidents since the first one took office. I was terrified, but I needed to know more. What could be done to stop it? "There's a ritual," Hawthorne said after a long silence. A containment ritual, something that can seal the beast for a time, but the price, Alan, is very high, and few have the courage to pay it. He showed me detailed pages about the ritual. Ancient words, symbols, sacrifices. The ritual required a life, a price of blood. I knew that if I was willing to continue, I would have to face this terrible truth. The sacrifice was necessary. As Hawthorne's words echoed in my mind, a sense of despair began to overtake me. It wasn't just the fact that there was an ancient, evil entity influencing the fate of the country. It was the weight of knowing what needed to be done to confront it. A sacrifice. Someone's life would have to be offered to keep this force in check, and there were no guarantees it would work. I returned home that night with my head spinning. The ritual required a life, but whose? Mine. I couldn't imagine sacrificing myself in such a way, even though I knew it might be the only way to stop the beast's influence, at least temporarily. The next few nights I combed through all the files, trying to figure out how past presidents had dealt with this force. More than that, I tried to understand the role of people like Hawthorne, Finch, and even Gerald. Maybe there was another way, something I had missed. But the more I delved into the legends and documents, the clearer the inevitable conclusion became. The sacrifice was a constant, and anyone who opposed the cycle ended up dead or disappeared, swallowed by the very power they tried to resist. I remembered Finch, the terror in his eyes when he spoke of the presence he had felt. Perhaps he knew more than he was willing to share that night. I began to wonder if Gerald's disappearance and Finch's mental collapse weren't somehow linked to the fact that they had seen up close what no one should ever see. And then, one night, I woke from a nightmare, one in which the walls of my apartment seemed to close in around me, and a voice whispered directly into my mind, repeating a single word: sacrifice. My eyes shot open, and I felt the presence. Something was in my room. Something that wasn't human. The air was heavy, oppressive. My lungs tightened, as if each breath was a monumental effort. I couldn't see clearly, but I knew it was there. Shadows denser than the darkness itself danced in the corners of the room, and for a moment, I had the sense that I was being watched from very close. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding violently in my chest. My entire body was trembling, and all I could think about was that the beast was there. I knew it didn't need to appear in physical form to exert its influence. It was the darkness itself, the invisible weight that made the air around me suffocating. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just watched, paralyzed, as the shadows crept closer. Then, suddenly, the air seemed to clear, and the sense of suffocation lessened, but the fear remained. I knew the beast was playing with me, testing me, waiting for the right moment to act. I was more and more trapped in its game. It wasn't just a matter of uncovering the truth. I had gone too far. It knew I was aware of its existence, and now it was only a matter of time before I succumbed to the same fate as so many before me. As the days passed, the paranoia grew. I avoided leaving home as much as I could. Even during the day, the shadows seemed darker and denser. At night, I slept less and less. And when sleep finally came, it brought nightmares, disturbing dreams where faceless figures crawled toward me, their distorted hands trying to drag me into the darkness. The sound of nails scratching the floor terrified me most, for it echoed so vividly that sometimes, when I woke up, I could still hear it in the real world. One of these nights, something inside me broke. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed help. That's when I remembered James Connolly. Connolly was the former chief of staff to the current president. He had mysteriously resigned months earlier, citing health reasons. But in Washington circles, there were rumors that his resignation had been forced after a sudden and inexplicable change in his behavior. Some said he had become paranoid, others that he was obsessed with a theory about dark forces influencing the government. And now, that made much more sense to me. I knew Connolly had seen something that led him to leave his position. Perhaps he knew more about the beast than anyone else alive, and he would be my only chance to understand how to act. I got his contact through an anonymous source and arranged a meeting in a discreet bar, far from downtown Washington. When Connolly arrived, I was shocked by his appearance. He was thin, his face pale and covered in dark circles. He looked like a man on the verge of collapse, as if the weight of something invisible was crushing his soul. He was no longer the powerful, articulate, and confident chief of staff who appeared on television. He looked like a ghost of himself. We sat at a table in the corner of the bar, away from curious eyes. The place was nearly empty, which gave me a false sense of security. After a few shots of whiskey, Connolly began to speak, but not directly. It was as if he was trying to convince himself to share what he knew without compromising his own sanity. "You think you understand what's happening, Alan?" he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You think you know what you found? But let me tell you something. There's no escaping this. From the moment you stepped into that place, it was already too late." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. Connolly rubbed his temples with trembling fingers, clearly disturbed. "They don't control us," he murmured. "We think we control power, but the real power is in the shadows. It always has been, since the first president, since the White House was built over it, over her." I knew exactly what he was talking about, but hearing it from such a direct source made the terror intensify. Connolly confirmed what Hawthorne had told me, but there was more. Much more. I saw it, Alan. The beast. It's not just a force, it's pure consciousness. It manipulates everything, every action, every political decision. We all serve it, in one way or another, and when you get too close, when you try to resist, it breaks you. We sat in silence for a few moments. Connolly's words were too disturbing to process all at once. He had seen the beast, just as I had, but he seemed more broken. I, at least, still had a thread of hope, a possibility to resist. But Connolly, he had already accepted his fate. "What happened to you?" I asked. Connolly laughed bitterly. "I tried to fight it, like you. I tried to understand what was behind it all, thinking I could find a way to contain it, to break the cycle. But you can't defeat it. It can't be destroyed, only delayed. And even that comes at a price I wasn't willing to pay." "The sacrifice," I ventured, remembering Hawthorne's words. Connolly stared at me with vacant eyes. "Yes, the sacrifice. There's always a price, Alan. The beast demands a life, and if you're not willing to pay it, it will take yours." He then paused for a long, heavy moment, as if deciding something. "But you still have a chance, maybe the last one." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "If you want to perform the ritual, I can help you. But know this, if you do it, there's no turning back. If you fail, you'll be consumed. And if you succeed, you'll be marked for the rest of your life. You'll never be truly free." I knew this was my only option. If I did nothing, the beast would come for me, sooner or later. I thanked Connolly, and we left the bar with a plan in place. That night, we entered the White House together. The déjà vu was overwhelming. I was back in that dark place, but this time, I wasn't alone. Connolly knew what to do. He had studied the ritual, knew the path, and the method. We descended together into the underground chamber, the place where it had all begun. When we got there, I felt the heavy air again. The oppression of the beast's presence was palpable. It was as if it knew we were there, preparing to challenge it. The ancient candles surrounding the stone altar flickered, as if an invisible wind passed through them. Connolly didn't hesitate. He picked up the ritual dagger and looked at me. "You need to be ready for what's coming next," he said, his voice now firm. "The ritual requires blood, a life sacrifice, and someone has to pay the price." Before I could react, Connolly drove the dagger into his own chest. His eyes widened, but he showed no pain. Instead, his expression was one of relief, as if he was finally being freed from a burden he had carried for too long. His blood began to flow over the symbols on the floor, activating the ritual. I tried to stop him, but it was too late. Connolly had accepted his fate, and his sacrifice was the key to completing the ritual. The shadows around us began to stir, as if the very chamber was alive, reacting to Connolly's blood. The beast hesitated, as if evaluating the sacrifice. A deafening sound filled the room, and for a moment, I thought everything would collapse. But then, the shadows retreated. The oppression lifted, and the air became lighter. The beast, satisfied with Connolly's sacrifice, withdrew into the depths of the darkness, leaving only silence behind. I knew at that moment that Connolly had saved me. He gave his life to contain the beast for a time, but I also knew this wasn't the end. The beast wasn't destroyed. It was only resting, waiting for the next cycle, the next fool, to get too close. I left the White House that night, carrying the weight of what had happened. Connolly was dead, and I was alive, but at what cost? I knew I would never be truly free. The beast was still there, and one day it would return. I'm writing this now as a final warning. If you're reading this, know that the cycle will continue. No one controls power. No one escapes the shadows. No matter how high you rise, the real power lies in the depths, and it's always lurking, waiting. Now I'm left with only the waiting. I don't know how much time I have left, but I know the beast will find me, and when it does, there will be no escape. I knew that Connolly's decision to sacrifice himself had temporarily sealed the beast's influence, but I was also aware that this ritual, that sacrifice, was not a permanent solution. The cycle would continue. That was the curse of the White House. The lives of everyone who set foot on that ground were inevitably connected to this entity. Presidents were merely puppets, thrown into the game by a force far beyond their understanding, and now I was part of it too. I returned to my apartment that night, feeling the weight of the guilt and responsibility now resting on my shoulders. I had survived, but the price was immeasurable. Connolly had sacrificed himself to save me, but the void his death left behind was suffocating. Deep down, I knew he had accepted what was coming long before I had. He was tired, consumed by a battle he couldn't win. I couldn't blame him for that. The sacrifice he made wasn't just for me, but to try to maintain balance. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that the beast was merely waiting. The following days were a blur. I tried to move on, to pretend everything was normal, but it was impossible to ignore the signs. I began to notice things that hadn't caught my attention before. In government meetings, on television, I saw the behavior of politicians and figures of power differently. They were all puppets. Some knew, others didn't, but all served something greater. I saw in the eyes of some government members the same lost look Connolly had. The look of someone who had seen the truth and knew there was no escape. The silence, the invisible presence, the shadows on the walls. It was all still there, surrounding me. Now I understood better what that oppressive feeling I had experienced before was. It was the mark of the beast, the influence that never really left me. Even with Connolly's sacrifice, the beast remained, watching, waiting for the next moment of weakness. I knew it was there, in the shadows, whispering to me. The sacrifice had only delayed the inevitable. On a particularly quiet night, when the world seemed to have stopped, I sat on the couch and tried to process everything that had happened. My eyes wandered around the room, stopping at the darkness in a corner where the streetlight couldn't reach. There it was again, the presence, that familiar feeling that I wasn't alone. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The weeks that followed were hell. My paranoia increased every day. The figures, the whispers, the sense of constantly being watched. I barely left the house. I avoided contact with anyone I knew, afraid they were involved too, that they knew more than they said. My health began to decline. The bags under my eyes deepened. My body grew weak, and my mind was on the verge of collapse. Sleeping was almost impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, it was as if the darkness came alive. The shadow in the corner of my room seemed to grow, creeping closer and closer to my bed, until I woke up, drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing. Then, one night, everything changed. I was in the middle of one of those nightmares when the oppressive feeling grew so intense I could barely breathe. The shadow seemed to be on top of me, suffocating me, crushing me against the mattress. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was as if my voice had been ripped from me. That's when I heard the whisper again, but this time it wasn't soft or distant. It was loud, clear, resonating inside my head as if it were a command. "You're part of me now." I woke with a jolt, my body drenched in sweat, my breath ragged. I looked around, gasping, but the darkness remained, still, as if waiting patiently. It wasn't willing to play with me anymore. It knew my time was running out. Connolly's sacrifice had bought me only a temporary reprieve. I knew at that moment the beast wanted more, and it would come to collect. I had two options: run and let it consume me, or try to fight it. And to fight, I knew I would need something more. I needed to fully understand the ritual, the rules, and the beast's weaknesses. It was no coincidence that only figures of power were influenced by it. There was a connection between ambition and the beast's influence, and perhaps that was where its weakness lay. The power it wielded was fueled by those who sought control over others. That's when I decided to take the most dangerous path. I needed to return to that chamber. I needed to see again what was buried down there, to confront what Finch, Gerald, and Connolly had seen. But this time, I would go prepared. I went back to consult the ancient writings, Hawthorne's notes, and the documents on the ritual. There was something Connolly hadn't mentioned, something implicit in the margins of his papers. The ritual wasn't just a way to seal the beast, but also a means to understand its true purpose. Every president who had entered the White House knew, on some level, that they were being touched by something beyond human control. Many succumbed, others went mad, but some, the most powerful ones, used this influence to their advantage. The beast didn't just corrupt, it granted power, and that power was the key. The following week, I began planning my return to the White House. This time, I didn't have Connolly to guide me, but I was determined to uncover the full truth. I knew this was risky. Every step I took toward the chamber brought me closer to the fate I was trying to avoid. Yet the morbid curiosity and need for answers were stronger than the fear. Through a government contact, I managed to get limited access to the building. Of course, I didn't have official permission to go to the basement, but with the right credentials and timing, I knew I could get in without raising too many suspicions. On the appointed night, I returned to the White House. The building felt much more threatening than before. Every corridor, every room seemed charged with an invisible energy, as if it was waiting for something. The presence of the beast was stronger there. It was impossible to ignore. I walked through the nearly deserted halls, recalling the paths Gerald had shown me last time. Every step echoed ominously, and the air seemed to grow denser as I approached the underground area. I knew what I was about to face, but I had no choice. When I reached the maintenance door that led to the depths, I felt my heart race. My hands were sweating, and my breathing was heavy. But I continued. I descended the creaky stairs, smelling the familiar mold and decay. The atmosphere down there was suffocating, as if the air itself was being consumed. When I reached the bottom, the same stone altar was before me, covered in the symbols that had been activated by Connolly's blood. But something seemed different this time. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation, as if the very chamber had been waiting for my arrival. With the flashlight trembling in my hands, I began reciting the words of the ritual. My heart was pounding, and the oppressive feeling I had experienced before began to grow again, as if the beast was awakening. The shadows on the walls started moving more frantically, as if something was coming to life. The ground seemed to tremble slightly beneath my feet, and a sense of absolute dread washed over me. Suddenly the whisper returned, but now it was different. It wasn't just a distant echo, it was a physical presence, something that surrounded me. The beast was there, everywhere, and I could feel it. The temperature in the chamber dropped drastically, and a cold wind swept through the space. The ancient candles around the altar flickered violently, almost going out. "Do you dare challenge me again?" The voice reverberated in my mind, deafening. It was as if it was inside me, fracturing my thoughts. The shadows began to stir more intensely, almost aggressively. The presence of the beast was overwhelming, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't be able to continue. But something inside me refused to give in. I had come too far to turn back now. With effort, I finished the final word of the ritual, and the chamber shook violently. The presence of the beast hesitated for an instant. The shadows stopped moving, and the intense cold lessened slightly. I knew the ritual was working. The beast was weakened, contained, but not defeated. The tension in the air seemed to lift, but deep down, I knew it was only temporary. The beast was retreating, but it hadn't left for good. It was just waiting for another moment of weakness, for another cycle. With the ritual complete, the chamber finally calmed. The silence that followed was almost as oppressive as the beast's presence. I looked at the stone altar, now bathed in a faint glow, as if it were devoid of power. But I knew that emptiness was temporary. The curse hadn't been broken, only delayed. I left the White House that night, once again marked by what I had witnessed. I survived, but at what cost? Connolly had sacrificed himself to temporarily seal the beast, and now, with the ritual complete, I knew it was dormant, but not defeated. The cycle would continue. Others would come. Others would try to unravel the secrets of that place, and the beast would find them. I returned to my apartment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I knew that, sooner or later, the darkness would return. The beast would never give up on its servants. It was patient, far older and more powerful than anyone could imagine. And now, I was part of this eternal cycle. As I write these words, I feel the same presence in the shadows. It's here, watching, waiting. There's no escape. The power was never in the hands of men. From the beginning, it belonged to the beast, and so it will continue until the end of time. Now, all I can do is wait. My time is running out.